live.
All right, welcome to Writing for a Genre Audience. I'm your moderator, Amanda Labonté, and I'm here with three really awesome genre writers from Engen Books. We've got Jon Dobbin, the author of the horror novel The Starving, Lauralana Dunne, whose debut novel Ashes is a YA new adult epic fantasy, and Sarah Thompson, the author of the romance novel The Love of Summer. So guys, I guess the first question I'm going to start with is, what do you think makes something a genre work? And we're going to start with Jon.
What makes genre work?
What makes something a genre work as opposed to just a fiction?
Oh, okay. It's weird. I guess genre is anything that's not everyday, kind of sort of ordinary. It's anything that takes the ordinary and makes it a little bit different. So you can go with romance, where you're making every day a romantic kind of view of things. You can take horror and make it kind of a scary place. You can take fantasy and make it a magical place. So you're taking ordinary and you're adding something to it. That's the way I look at it, I suppose. I don't know if there's any real dictionary answer to that. Unfortunately, I don't have my dictionary in front of me, so I wouldn't be able to say. But yeah, that's the way I look at it. I mean, the fun thing about genre is you can just take it and go whatever way you want. At one point, I'm sure, way back when they were writing Western novels, that was the everyday and the ordinary. Now it's different. Now it's a Western is a genre on its own. And now some people have taken it and made it weirder. So like me, I made it a horror Western, and other people have made, I've recently come across a subgenre called splatter Western, which is kind of like a gory version of Western. And there's like romance Western. It's just crazy. Western is a fun thing to write about. But yeah, genre is anything that takes the everyday and the ordinary and just adds something to it.
Cool. Lauralana?
Yeah, I guess adding to that, it's an underlying theme, but in a really cool sense, it's open-ended. So long as you touch on, like as an example, Jon was saying, the Western portion of it. So you have, your cowboys, you're in the Wild West, and I guess your guns and all those things. You can have the freedom to branch off from it and add other elements to it, and it still kind of ties it together. And I think that is one of the main things that make it work for sure.
Awesome. Sarah?
I will agree with that, but I'll also say it can work the other way around too. It's taking the extraordinary and turning it into the ordinary so it becomes relatable for another audience.
Awesome. So I'm going to start with Lauralana this time. When you're outlining your work, do you consider the audience that's going to read it?
Initially, when I outline, no. So generally speaking, I have a story that I'm trying to get across, or I have, an arcing plot, and I put the elements together for it. I have found that when I do editing, that's more so when I think about the actual, maybe the age range as an example. I do young adult or I do new adult, and they hug the line pretty frequently between the two. Some might have a more adult feel or adult themes that are added to it. So depending on which direction I'm skewing it in, then yes, absolutely at that point, I might say, oh, maybe this word choice is a bit too much, or maybe this happenstance is a bit graphic. I might want to tone it down a bit. Or if I'm going the other direction, maybe I'll add some more detail or kind of pump it up a bit. So initially in the outline, no, that's kind of just for me and kind of what's going on internally in my headcanon, as a way to say it. But once I'm editing, for sure, that's really when I start to think about it.
Awesome. How about you, Sarah? Do you think about the romance audience when you're outlining?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's no other way. Mostly because, for anyone who doesn't know, I write lesbian romance. So it's a little bit different in that immediately when you're outlining, you have to think about finding a way to make a purist relationship and to show that relationship the same way that you'd show any relationship through novel form, through film, through television, whatever, so that it becomes normal, everyday, and mundane as much as it is romantic and fun and interesting.
How about you, John?
Outlining. Who outlines anymore? No, I was really bad. My first novel was The Starving. I didn't outline at all until after I'd written it. So I didn't really think about audience, and I think I'd like to mirror kind of what the other guy said. Basically, you do kind of think about it in a way, like you think about who you're writing for. But when you first start out, you're just trying to get the story down, right? You're just trying to get the story that's stuck in your head out onto paper. And then eventually you start to think about it a little bit more. And it's funny for me, my next novel that's coming out is different genre than what I started out on. And so I had to think about after the fact how the audience is going to be a little bit different. And what would I include in that's kind of like fan service to the different audiences. For different genres, kind of thing. Because there are certain expectations from different genres. For people who read those types of genres, they expect certain things to happen in there. In romance, obviously, there's going to be some sort of romance. There's going to be a love story in there, whether it's turned on its head or it's a fairy tale kind of ending. There's going to be a romance in there. In Western, you're going to have a gunfight at some point. That's kind of a thing. In fantasy, you're going to see some magical stuff happen, hopefully, maybe. So yeah, there's some expectations there. So once you get your story down on paper, you really do have to think about, okay, well, am I meeting the expectations of a possible audience for this?
Excellent. I'm going to start with Sarah next. What kind of process do you have when you're developing your characters?
So it depends. That's a tough one, because sometimes I like to say that they're my friends as well. And especially during COVID, my best friends have been my book characters. And they like to get away from me and tell their own stories sometimes and tell me who they are. But a lot of times I draw a lot of inspiration from people I've known, and I take a lot of things from what I know, what I've done for a living, things I've done, places I've been, those kinds of things, and add those characteristics of myself and people around me to form someone who hopefully feels like a fully formed person who has their own interests outside of the basis of just being a character in a book.
Awesome. How about you, John?
With my characters, they kind of just come to me the same way the story comes to me. They're just kind of people I want to write about, like just like the story is, I want to get this story out. These people are part of that story and they go with it. Again, kind of like what we've been saying up to this point anyway, is after you write the initial story, you go back and you kind of look at the characters and you kind of fine tune them to make them fit kind of what's happening in there, right? Like, you can't have a main character who is completely despicable if you're trying to create a story that has a happy ending at the end, like there has to be some sort of character growth in there. So if you start out with a really horrible character at the beginning, there's really not a way to come back from that depending on what happens at the beginning. So the character kind of grows as the editing process grows, I guess. That's the way I build on my characters.
Lauralana?
Yeah, mine's very similar to John. So the main thing I'm writing right now is an epic fantasy, which for people who don't read that means that there are a lot of characters introduced throughout the entirety of the story. So for me, the process is mainly to think about the main character. So what I do so far is I only tell it from the main character's point of view. It's not first person, but when I alternate chapters, it's not from someone else's point of view. It doesn't, jump heads, is a way to say it. So my main thing is, how can I best tell this story as it relates to one person's experience, but who are the supporting actors? Who are the supporting characters who help her on the journey or through her character arc? Who are the people who maybe they show up and have a few zingers or one-liners and then maybe they'll come back for another 10 chapters, that sort of thing. So for me, the main thing to do is figure out what I'm doing with the story, what I want my main character to react to, what I want her to experience, write in the supporting characters, and then, like John mentioned, when you're editing, then when you kind of polish it, you think, okay, how can I make this character stand out from a different one? Maybe they have a different trait or a different personality, or they have a little quirk that makes them different from other people, and kind of just round them out that way. It can be time consuming depending on what it is you're writing and how long your work is, but it's definitely worth it. I enjoy reading books that have discernible characters and aren't just reflections of what the main character is going through.
So this wasn't one of the questions I had originally, but it occurred to me as you guys were talking. Do any of you have like a single particular favorite character that you've written? John?
I definitely do. And it's not even, well, he's one of the characters in my upcoming novel. And he's just so fun to write. He's kind of like a thief kind of character, and he's just like a thief crossed with Indiana Jones, and he's just a fun guy to play around with. And it's kind of freeing to write him a little bit, because I'm so used to writing and playing towards the character of the big kind of brawny kind of guy, that kind of thing. Or like in my Starving novel, Weston is the main character, and he's kind of like the stoic Western stereotype kind of guy a little bit. And this guy's just so fun, he's playful. He makes like little one-liners here and there. He's adventurous. He's jumping around doing certain things. It's just a fun character to play around with. And he's not even, I wouldn't even classify him as a main character. He is one of the main characters, but he almost comes across as just a fun kind of side character that you get to play with every now and then. And I'm really looking for ways to kind of write some more about him. But keeping him kind of a side character too, because I think that's part of the fun with him.
Anyone else?
Yeah, sure. So I think my favorite character might be in my Ashes book, the main character's best friend, Raina, or Ray as I call her. She's kind of quirky. She's a little saucy, and she's just fun, kind of like John said. I guess authors enjoy writing fun characters. It's playful. It adds an element to a book that makes you pause and have a little smile, something like that. So she's definitely, so far, she's been my favorite one to write for sure.
Hey, Sarah?
Actually, strangely enough, one of the most minor characters in my book is probably my favorite, and it's my main character's brother, because he just kind of says everything like it is, and like just get over yourself all the time. So it's just fun to have that person that you can throw in there when things get too tense and say, just get over it. You're okay.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to go back to the list now, and I'll start with John this time. And I think this is true for all of you, but if your books are part of a series, how does writing a series affect your writing process? And do you think that series is like a big part of genre writing?
I think it's become a big part of genre writing. I mean, a lot of different like mainstream books that you see, and I'm hesitating to use the word mainstream, but that's the only thing I can come up with at the top of my head. But you see a lot of series come out now. There's at least 3 book series. It can go up to 7, 10, those kind of book series. I mean, we had the Harry Potter series. I'm loath to mention that because of the author, but we had the Hunger Games series. We had a bunch of these kind of big series that came out. And I think it's kind of like something that has happened a lot in genre, and it's something that people come to expect a little bit. But there is certainly a different approach that you take when you're trying to write a series. I haven't figured it out yet, because most of my books, I start out thinking maybe this will be published. Maybe someone will like this enough to want to read it. And so I write it. And then I'm left thinking, what am I going to do next? Should I do a sequel to this? Should I make it a series kind of thing? And so the way I've kind of approached it is kind of in a kind of serial kind of way of looking at it, kind of like the old pulp ways of doing it, where you just take the character and put him in weird situations and see how he deals with it. Same character, but there may not be any reference to the background, to the last book kind of thing. I know that's not going to work forever if I want to create a successful series, but it's the way I've kind of focused on what I'm doing for the time being. And I'm sure I'll have to figure out how to do it a little bit differently afterwards. Hopefully your answers, you guys can help me out with that.
Lauralana?
Yeah, so I found, at least when I was younger, I was really into young adult fantasy, so that hasn't changed at all. I was always drawn towards the trilogies and the series because I really liked getting invested in a make-believe world, and then to have that world continue on after the end of one book. Like that was really nice. You could continue either with the same characters or not, but if you fell in love with a place to read about, the fact that there might be 6 more books waiting for you was, pretty exciting. And now as an author, I'm kind of finding the same thing, but from a writing angle. I'm creating this world from scratch. I'm putting all these elements in it. I'm going through all this work. So I guess maybe selfishly kind of want to keep going with that. I want to keep exploring what happens. I want to explain more of the backstory of the lore, everything in that sense. I do find it a bit difficult because I don't do the pulp style. I don't just take the same characters and put them in a new one, a new book, which would be easy and fun. I think very time consuming otherwise. I do a lot of foreshadowing. So in the first book I have, there's little one-offs, or I'll call them a side quest if you want to use like a gaming analogy. That's it's a setup for a payoff that will happen in book 2 or maybe book 3. And I think outlining is a big part of that, but hopefully that might help Jon if he wants to continue on. I'd like to see Weston in some more stories for sure, but there's definitely another element to doing it. And I think a lot of readers of fantasy, again, that's what I write. I think that's something that they're geared towards just because of that particular genre.
How about you, Sarah?
So romance writing in any way is really formulaic. So everybody in the world has watched Hallmark movies. If you watch enough of them, you will find out that there are 3 formulas for any romance. And you either have formula A beginning to end, B, or C. And usually within the first 20 minutes, I've watched way too many of these things and I can figure out which formula they're using right off the top. So you know what's going to happen and who's winding up with who and all those kinds of things. So in a way, writing romance in a series, you either have to get your characters together, start again by breaking them up, and figure it out all over again by using a different one of the formulas. So in terms of, I wanted to keep my world alive. So when I moved on to try to write the next book, it's more about the place and some of the more minor characters as their lives continue and they carry on into a new story that encompasses characters you get in this book, but will also give you a completely different tale of 2 people and their lives, as opposed to just continuing on with the same. So I guess the same way Lauralana was saying, new characters, same world, more so than just continuation of story.
Yeah, I think romance does that a little bit differently than other genres because you can kind of have, I read a lot of romance, and you can kind of have like a whole series where you're kind of introduced to characters, but like the focus of each book kind of shifts along. And that seems to be one of the more popular ways that like romance is going in general.
Yeah, and it helps you to bring in those minor characters, and people will then hopefully like that character and want to know more about their life. But by the time you finish reading a romance novel, you're done with the relationship that you've been reading about for this period of time. So having that minor character that maybe you've grown attached to, that you can find out more about their life, really will help you move along in the story.
Yeah. So actually, not to insert myself, but one of the pieces of advice I got when I was writing a series was to, because it was first book and you don't know if it's going to sell, was to pick like the Star Wars model. So like the original, like episode 4, 5, 6. So you write your first book with an almost tidy ending. And then if you sell the second book, you can have like the Empire Strikes Back ending where it's like a cliffhanger because they'll take the third book if you sold the second book. So that was the advice I was given. So it's sort of, you can take it or leave it. So I'll start with Lauralana this time. So what do you like best about the genre or genres you write in? Because I know you've done some short stories in other genres too. So what do you like best?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes? Okay, good. Yeah, so the short stories were one-offs. They were more experimental, I think, for me. Fantasy, YA fantasy has definitely been my biggest love for reading and writing. I like, kind of circling back to the first question and what makes a genre, I like that it's very open-ended. So the stuff I do is called high fantasy. It means I kind of create the world from the ground up. So I am making the rules about what is happening. I get to introduce really fun elements of things that I enjoy, whether it's things I enjoy reading or, you know, watching in movies. And there's no real set script that I have to follow about what can or cannot be used. And it's like a flexing of the imagination. It's very fun. It's time consuming, but it's fun time. So I really enjoy doing that. And I think that's probably my favorite part of at least the genre that I write in and read in for the most part.
Awesome. How about you, Sarah?
I like to try to confuse the formula. That's my favorite part about it, is how can I make this work without following the formula the right way? Can I combine some formulas? Can we figure out a new way to get us from point A to point B? Maybe we have to hit point C in the middle instead of at the end, and you know, go from there, that kind of thing. But it's just fun to see if there's a new and different way to create romance outside of the normal box that you would find it in.
How about you, Jon?
I'm going to echo Sarah's actually, because my genre that my book that's been out since May is Western horror, and it's not one genre; it's two combined. And so it's kind of like I like playing in both sandboxes a little bit, like taking toys from both sides and putting them together and see how it works out. I just like that idea. I've always kind of been fascinated when you see two things cross over. And how that would work out. And that's kind of where, or partially where, the Western horror kind of thing came from. Like, what would happen if there was monsters in the Wild West? What would happen if a regular cowboy had to deal with some sort of crazy, like, Lovecraftian eldritch thing coming after him? And I just really like playing with that idea a little bit, you know, like working in some of the different tropes and ideas from both to see how they work together.
Nice. So some people would say that a lot of genre is, like, getting back to the formula concept, is formulaic. So what would you say to someone who said it's easy to write genre because there is a formula? Sarah?
You got to know what to put in the formula, I think. So sure, knowing that if you sit down to outline, there is a formula for how it works is one thing, but having the interesting characters and the way to drive the story to get you through the formula is what makes it more than just the presentation of, you know, meet cute, fight for no reason. Someone figures out that it was all by accident. Ta-da! We're at the end. So, but having the people, that the characters and the motivation that drives them through those points is what makes it what it is, outside of the fact that yes, you have to get from point A to point B in said formula.
How about you, Jon?
I find it funny when people say that, because all writing has a formula. You know, like, everything is done a certain way. If I'm going to put on my Matt LeDrew hat now and say something like, "Oh, there's certain steps that every story must hit to be a successful story," then that's just the way it is. And it's just so happens that genre has some extra things that we can add in every now and then to make it a little bit more interesting, you know, or to subvert some of the initial formulas that come from regular writing. So yeah, it's just a funny way of putting it. That's all.
Lauralana?
basically just going to echo what Sarah and John said already. I mean, a lot of life is formulaic anyway. Again, any kind of writing in its sense is formulaic. Like Sarah said, it depends how you use the formula, what it is that you put in, the characters that you're building. Just because someone slaps a formula in a story, it doesn't really mean you want to read that story. You kind of have to make it interesting. And I think therein lies the challenge of having a good novel or having a good story, is you take something, you're not even reinventing it, but you have these readers who go, yeah, this was really great. This was, a good chunk of my time that I spent, and I'm really happy I did this. And I think that's not an easy feat. So I don't know why anyone would say that.
It's funny because there's, I'm sure all of us have heard of where people take bots and make them read a certain thing or watch a certain thing, and then they make a story or a song or whatever. I mean, you can take a bot and give him the formula to a story, and he'll write one. Is it going to be good? No, it's probably going to make no sense whatsoever, but it's following a formula. So yeah, it's interesting.
Very true. I mean, I've read a lot of what I'll say bad books I didn't enjoy, stories I didn't enjoy. They could follow the same formula. Someone who is, good at what their craft is and good at what they're doing can take something like that and really run with it. And I wouldn't consider that easy at all.
It's someone who's good at what they do too. You forget that they're using a formula. You're not looking for that. You're just following what's happening in the world.
Exactly.
So the question I said I'd keep if unless we had a lot of time, and we got time. So how about the concept of tropes, guys? Do you have one that you in your writing that you really don't like? We can start with John this time.
I mean, like the Mary Sue, right? The girlfriend in the fridge kind of thing. Like that kind of thing is a bit overdone, and it's not really good. Like it's kind of an aged and antiquated way of doing things. And I really strive hard to stay away from that, like to have like the female or the love interest that is the person that is kind of forcing, for my genre anyway, forcing the thoughts and the choices of the main character. I think it should be more of an internal choice, which I mean, I'm sure love is an internal choice as well, but just the whole like damsel in distress kind of thing is a bit overdone. And as someone who's writing in a Western type genre, you picture like Snidely Whiplash curling his mustache with like a woman on the train tracks kind of thing. Like you try and avoid that a little bit when you're writing. So like that's the kind of thing I like to stay away from. Now I'd love to see someone take that and turn it on its head. I haven't been able to do that myself yet. It just hasn't been part of the stories I've been writing. But yeah, like when tropes are taken and turned upside down or changed around, made silly. Like there's a series by Kevin Hearn and Delilah S. Dawson called, I forget what it's called, but there's one is Save the Farm Boy and another one is The Princess Beard, and it's really taking the tropes that you get in like fantasy and Western genre fiction and turning them on their head, and it sounds really funny. And I'd like to read them sometime, but I haven't had a chance yet. But yeah, like that's the kind of thing I'd like to see done with tropes. Yeah.
Lauralana, do you have one you hate?
Yes. So for fantasy, I'm going to say the magical person of color, the supporting one. That one was pretty prevalent in fantasy and science fiction, where the white main character stumbles across a person of color who happens to know some tribal magic or something along those lines, and then just supports the main character throughout whatever their journey is, and shows up out of the woodwork to help them out magically and all those things. That one, if I never came across it again, I definitely would not be mad about that. But other than that, I don't really take issue with tropes. I think they can be very interesting, like John said, especially if someone can turn it on their head and, you know, there's a little, oh, I didn't see that coming. I think that can be pretty masterfully done. I think in some respect, depending on the subgenre, it's what ties the story together. It's what readers of the genre look for anyway. And I think that's just a really good way for people to find more books that they like and discover more authors that they're interested in.
Cool. Sarah?
Yeah, I told you this is going to be bad.
I knew you were going to love this question.
Oh, okay. So, I'm not mad at your basic trope, like you have to have your meet cute. Like that, when I think about a trope that happens in literature, in television, anything like that, that's not where my brain goes. And a big part of that is because in gay culture, especially in the past few years, there's been a huge uprising about the fact that everybody wants to bury their gays. Actually, I wore the perfect t-shirt for that today. So for anyone who watches the 100 or had watched the 100, spoiler alert if you haven't, early on in the series we find out that our main character is bisexual. She meets this woman from Earth. They kill her the second they get together. They not only her female love interest but also a person of color. So we've pulled two tropes together and just destroyed all of it at one time in this particular instance, and it caused a huge it created its own convention called Lexicon because people were so mad that they killed Lexa on the 100. But it brought to light how often that actually was happening, that people were bringing gay characters into a show just for ratings, and then either they disappear from the face of the earth, you never hear about them again. They were literally there for 2 episodes and oh, guess they don't exist anymore, like Missy, who goes upstairs in Family Matters and never comes back down. But but in this case, a lot of the answer, especially in drama shows, was to kill off the character for shock value. So it became such an intrinsic part of what you expected to see in the culture of a gay character's introduced. When are they going to kill them? How are they going to die? To a point where right now, like that, again, that's the big battle. Like you have to avoid bringing in the gay character for the sake of it, or because you want a character that you can eliminate. So for me, like those kinds of tropes are what you see a lot in gay fiction, period. And there's a number of others as well, but that's the one that just makes me angry. So it just takes a lot of effort to make sure that you're not falling into that trap. You don't want to fall into the fact that, they're gay until they're not. You don't want to fall into, I need to kill someone off, well, let's make them gay first. So it's just a really fine balance between developing a full-fledged character that just doesn't happen to be straight, giving them a personality, giving them a life, giving them everything, and then not just destroying that for the sake of shock value.
Can I ask you a follow-up?
Sure.
Why do you think that became such a prevalent trope? Do you think it was like the lack of diversity in the writing rooms, or?
I think that's a big part of it.
Okay.
Lack of diversity in writing rooms, but also the fact that people in the writing rooms wanted to push for the characters to be introduced. They
Right.
wanted to push to have that representation build. However, they got a lot of pushback. So showrunners, they're getting pushback from networks, from publishing companies, from all those kinds of things who are looking at them and saying, this doesn't sell. They're forgetting that there's a huge audience that it does sell to, and are more interested in their cis white male who's going to spend money on advertising products and those kinds of things. So they want to move away from the characters that aren't going to build their advertising base necessarily, for lack of a better way of putting it, especially like network television. So, they try to do the introduction. They push to have some sort of representation, but in order to assure people like networks that this isn't something that we're going to make a main part of our show, they find a way out of it quickly. So I think that's how it fell into that whole of this is just the formula of what you do. You introduce a gay character and you find a way to get them dead. So it just, over time, it became so prevalent that there just became this huge pushback against it.
Does anybody want to talk about a trope that they really like? With romance, how do you feel about the happy ever after?
That's a good question. I think everybody wants a happy ever after.
Yeah.
And especially in this case, so after my big rant about why I don't like the trope of you kill off your character, for that reason, I think that's a lot of what gay culture needs right now, is a lot of happy ever after. And they need to see it all come together in one way or another to give a, for lack of a better word, a normal ending for the characters.
Nice. Anybody else?
I mean, I think happily ever after is kind of a trope that happens in a bunch of different genres, and I mean, everybody kind of likes it to a certain extent. I mean, even Stephen King has written horror stories that have ended happily, you know, like, oh yeah, Cujo's dead, but oh wait, something else happened as well. So yeah, there are that really didn't end happy. I don't know why I said Cujo. That is not a happy ending of a book. Spoiler alert. But yeah, I think everybody like my novels. Most of my novels end fairly happy. You know, like it's a happy ending. It's not exactly what everybody's thinking is going to happen, but it's a happy ending. If you think of like common movies, you get a happy ending. It's a change, of course, but that's what happens in any good story. There's a big change that happens, and by the end, we see what happens after that. It could be good, it could be bad. Most times, people like to see a good story, good ending to that story. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think audiences, viewers, readers, they like to go on, say, a journey with a main character, but in that time they become attached to them. So I think everyone's interested in maybe a bit of escapism. They're interested in just to see where something is going. But at the end, they still kind of want everything to be hunky-dory. They want to go, well, that was a fun adventure, on to the next one, or let us never speak of this again, goodbye, and kind of leave it that way. And I haven't really read a lot of romances, going back to that one, but my understanding is that's kind of what makes a romance, is that trope. So I think that's the audience that it's geared towards. That's the people who want to read those or watch those. And I mean, as Jon just said, even King dabbles in his horrific stories being happy endings. I think maybe it's just a part of human nature. It's kind of what we're looking for.
Not Cujo though. Cujo is a bad ending. I'm sorry.
Sorry, Cujo. Spoiler alert.
I love the happy ever after ending, and I come from a long line of romance readers, so I think part of the reason that it resonated with female readers for so long is, like, when I look at like the generations before me who read these books, they were read by women who really didn't have a lot of control in their lives, and they knew they were going to get a happy ever after with this book if they followed it through, and like just ate them up. Like, it was, I think that there's a lot to be said for knowing how an ending is going to be. Yeah.
Sure. In some ways, I think it changes the genre if you don't have the happy ever after. It's no longer a romance anymore.
I would argue that, but people would argue back with me too.
For sure.
So I'll start with Lauralana this time. So I know you just recently put out your first book during COVID. Is there anything that you'd change about, now that you have all this experience, about the approach that you took to writing your first book? So like, is there any lesson you took away from it that somebody might be able to use going forward in their journey?
I think my biggest takeaway is kind of to experiment what you feel is your writing style. And I don't mean necessarily your writing voice, but the way in which you sit down to write. So for years, I was the night owl who would write in the evenings, and I would do it whether inspiration struck or just because that was like a quiet time when it was good to write. And I was a pantser. I would just go, hey, here's a cool scene I've thought of. Let me just jot this down real quick some evening. And due to the way that life changes, I guess, as you get older and you have more things going on in your life, none of that was viable anymore. So even though my instinct is still absolutely to pants in the middle of the night at kind of 2 a.m., plotting and then setting aside specific writing time during the day for me was actually the most beneficial way to go about doing it, because it meant I had something that got done. And I think if I had maybe discovered that a few years ago, that this would have happened possibly a lot faster, or at least I would have had a main end draft that I would have been more content with at that time. But in fairness, I might not be a part of Engen's team, or that might have not happened in this particular way. So I'm kind of happy about that, but I can definitely take that going forward for subsequent novels and hopefully learn from my silly little mistakes there.
Awesome. Sarah, do you have any lessons
I
that
originally
you do differently?
wrote a short story that became this novel about 10 years ago, and I didn't think it was very good. And it followed me from flash drive to flash drive for about a decade. And when everybody started talking about all the tropes, I sat down and I looked at what I had written, and I realized that I had written all of them. So I thought, it'd be fun to take this and see if it could be a little bit more than just a series of tropes. So I sat down and started to flesh it out as a novel. I was really lucky, I guess, quote unquote, not necessarily. I had been laid off from my job and wound up having nothing to do. So I thought, okay, let's write a book, which again meant creating a schedule for myself. That's what I learned really fast, is I had to create a schedule for myself. I'm going to write at this time. I'm going to edit at this time. I'm going to actually take time and breathe for a minute at this hour of the day so that I don't get overwhelmed with what I'm trying to do. And then when I was finished with it, the biggest thing I learned is you can only edit yourself so many times. And no matter how many times you try, you're never going to think you're perfect. So have somebody else read it. Make sure that you get somebody to read what you're doing and tell you one way or the other. Someone who's going to be honest with you about what you've put on the page, and then, continue to just try to grow from there.
Cool. John?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Lauralana and Sarah here. I mean, you do need to find time. You need to make the time to do this. But I mean, I don't know if for me, I have 3 kids, so it's hard, and I have a full-time job and wife and all that fun stuff. And I have a lot of distractions, a lot of things that would take away from writing. And so you kind of need to find the time. Like, you need to force yourself to find time to do it. And sometimes scheduling doesn't work out, but you still got to force yourself to do some writing, do some editing. And the other thing that I've learned is that you need to read to write. And this is kind of something that's been out there for a long time. A lot of people use that as writing advice, but I wrote my first novel and I got that out of the way, and that was great, and I was happy. And then I started working on other things, and I found that I was putting too much time into writing and not enough time into reading, and I found my writing suffered because of it. I wasn't as interested in my writing. I thought everything I wrote was crap, which I kind of still do, but not as much anymore. And but reading kind of gives you, and I think Chelsea B mentioned this earlier when she was talking about taking a manuscript and putting it aside for a little while and reading for just rediscovering reading for the 2 weeks in there. Like, it kind of gives you an idea of, oh yeah, this is what writing is, this is what you can be writing like, kind of thing. But I think you can do it throughout. Like, you need to find time to read, to kind of keep those creative juices flowing even when you're not writing. And I think it's just as important to be able to do that as it is to find time to write. You need to find time for both, because otherwise you lose that creative ideas. You lose your creative juices, I guess, for lack of a better term, the gross term that I use. But yeah, I think you need to read, you need to write, and you need to find time for both.
So I'll start with you, John, because this is a good follow-up from what you just said. Were there particular books or authors that helped you to do, like, either just they wrote in that style, or just they helped you with your craft that you really liked?
Yeah, I'm Well, there's no secret that Stephen King is one of my favorite authors, and so a lot of my writing comes from influences based on him. Um, but I'm also a bit of a writing, um, how-to writing book junkie. Like I like to read all of those types of books, and I found that when I wrote my first book, I was really focused more on Stephen King's on writing. I actually hadn't read any Western novels up to that point. I've watched a few Western movies, but I hadn't watched any Western novels. It was just an idea I had in my head, and so I had to do a bit of research around that. But since then, I've read a couple of really good writing things that kind of puts writing in a different perspective, like Story Genius and Wired for Story by Lisa Cron. They're both really great books that kind of take it and make it more of a psychological view of things, like just taking it and making it about, like, she kind of counterpoints it with, okay, this is what writing formulas look like, and here's what psychologists would say about that, and why does this work for character development, kind of thing. But there's also certain small books like Writing the Other, which is a great book, because in my first novel I had a Native American character, and obviously the sensitivity around that and how I treated that character was there, and I didn't go to anyone. I did eventually go to our local group for First Light and ask them about the character, and they said he was fine. But I mean, you kind of also got to think about that in your writing as well, like writing other people outside of your person, your groupings, and how you can do that correctly. So yeah, there's a lot of different advice that I've gone through and looked into in my writing since the first book. The first book was kind of just, I got to get this story out. And since then, I've kind of just been relying on my own ideas, but kind of tempering them with other people. And not only that, but having other good writers surrounding me who can, as Sarah said about, and like having good advice, just having people who will tell you what's good and what's not working. And so I think if you have someone who can do that, that's even better advice than any other book or any other person can kind of give you, if you have someone who's honest with you.
How about you, Lauralana?
So I haven't done any formal training. I didn't do any, educational courses, I'll say, with regards to writing. And unlike Jon, I'm not a how-to book junkie. So I haven't really read any, suggestions from other authors on how they've done it. But having said that, I've done a lot of local panels. So we're really lucky here in St. John's and in Newfoundland. We have a thriving artistic community, which is phenomenal. And over the past few years, there have been many panels by authors, award-winning authors, local people who have gotten up to talk about their writing processes, what they've done, what they found helpful, what they didn't. So I've attended a lot of those. They were all fantastic. I'm also very lucky to be part of a local writing group. So pre-COVID, we used to meet once a week. We would bounce ideas off of each other. It's nice just to get together with another group of creatives and realize, hey, there's other people out there who are going through the same things. Writing is a very solitary activity. It's just you and a pen and paper, or you and a keyboard. And so getting together with other people who are working on their own things, but kind of realizing you may have the same problems as others is strangely affirming. And it's a good source of information, and it's a good way to ask for help. It's good for kind of just stirring the pot. You can talk about this or that. So I've been really lucky to meet people like that, to have in my life, that if I have an issue, sometimes at 10 in the night, I'm like, hey, anyone want to be an interactive thesaurus? And, a few people will be like, yeah, me. And then you just throw a word out there. Or sometimes it devolves into discussing dinosaurs in space. I mean, it's silliness, but it's wonderful. And so, especially now with COVID, if you can find something online, that's something I would definitely recommend. There are a lot of local authors who are doing paper courses you can do online. I think Matt LeDrew might be starting up new ones. I did those a few years ago. And so if I guess the resources are out there if you're not someone who wants to pick up a how-to reading book because you're worried maybe that's going to take away from, you know, my writing time. Find someone local to bounce ideas off of, because that's a really great avenue to use.
How about you, Sarah?
I was afraid of this. I've lost track of the question.
So the question was, do you have, are there books or authors that helped you in your like writing journey? So either to understand your audience or to write what you write. So it can be like other like fiction in that genre, or it could be like just resources.
So about 15 years ago, I picked up a book called Tipping the Velvet by Sarah Waters, who, if anybody out there knows who I'm talking about, I'm very, very impressed. She's a really popular British author, not so much so on this side of the pond. And it's a lesbian romance novel, basically, but it's not billed as such. It's historical, and it's all kinds of things, actually. And it was the first thing that made me realize that I can buy lesbian romance in novel form, and I can take this home and read it. And she wrote more of these. So I started buying all of her books, and I've read pretty much all of them now, and they're all set in different time periods. But a lot of what she deals with is basically these women being in hiding. So it's very, very different from what I wanted to do. But what it did inspire me to realize was that I could write something like this, but I don't want to write it in the past. I think we need something that needs to happen now. That shows you what life is more like now, or at least a year ago, and not currently through Zoom dating. But you know, like there's lots of ways that you can go about it. But it's just inspirational to see this person who it became so very popular as an author and was doing this. And it just gives you inspiration to think, well, if that's what I want to do, and I try hard enough, or I work at it, then maybe I can also do those things.
Nice. Still have a bunch of questions, but we're going to run out of time. So there's one that I kind of came up with as you guys were talking, but I think it's important. And the question is, why do you think, or I hope you think, because you write it, like, why do you think genre is important? And the reason I'm asking this is a lot of times there are books that are just seen as you read it for fun, or you read it to relax, or it doesn't like it's not highly literary. It is one of the critiques that you sometimes get of genre writing. And I guess, why do you personally think it's important to your genre or genre in general? And whoever wants to answer first can, because I don't want to put anyone on the spot.
Genre is the real political writing. Genre is a way for you to really fucking curse word to really take down the politics of the time. You can really make your characters as similar as you want to the people that you're having trouble with in terms of politics and things like that, and kind of focus on the negative side of things without being like completely like obvious or writing hate literature and things like that. It's a way to kind of juxtapose how you see the world in a different light, and kind of make fun of it a little bit and poke fun and show where the errors are. I think science fiction has done a really great job of that, and that's not one that I write in personally, but I think science fiction can and does a really great job of looking at what we are right now and pointing out where we could be going, and it's going to be, sometimes that can be pretty negative looking, and that kind of lets you know, listen, if we don't kind of stop what we're doing right now, then we're in trouble. And I think that's a great way to look at it. And so it's a thinking kind of literature, I guess. Genre is, it makes you think, makes you learn, and also in terms of my books, because I don't know if I have any political stuff in mind, they're just fun to read. Go read them, and I curse in them, so sorry about cursing.
You know what? Gene Roddenberry was a political genius, and he doesn't get the credit for it, because you get a lot of people these days who complain like, oh, this, Star Trek, you watch Star Trek nowadays, is so political. If you never saw the original series, you have no idea that it's been political since day one. He made such a great commentary on life and on politics and on where the world was headed. You're absolutely right that it changed people's mindsets in a number of ways. Like he broke political boundaries and race boundaries and gender boundaries all over the place, and the show continued to do so for decades. And a lot of science fiction is like that because you can set it in the future, so you can say this is what's wrong with our world, but you don't see it yet because you don't see it the way it could be. And I find that's a really, really interesting commentary that you don't see in I guess what people call literary. I don't quite understand. You ask what a definition of genre is, and who knows, really. It's lots of things, but I guess I don't really know what literary is either until someone defines it 50 years later and says this was a literary work. So I think literary means historical, but it's hard to say really. But yeah, so you're right. Yeah, science fiction is brilliant for that sort of stuff.
Do you want to get in there, Lauralana?
It's basically just rehashing, I think. Good genre writing is a way to kind of flex your brain and imagination. So if you're reading it, then to me anyway, you're kind of just expanding your mind to see what should be happening in the world as opposed to what is happening in the world. And if it's interesting enough to write about and to have a following for, maybe it's something, you can kind of try to ascertain in your life, something you can try to emulate maybe. But I believe with both Jon and Sarah, I mean, it's interesting aspects, it's political, and I think that's why it's important, because it's not a commentary on what has been or what is currently happening. It's the potential of what could happen, which I think again is very important.
It's awesome. And one other point I would make too is just, I think it's nice to see representation sometimes. So even in a standard story, like I'm lucky because I'm on the Engen board, so I get to see feedback sometimes. And one of the things with Sarah's novel in particular was that just people seeing themselves reflected in a book in a way that they weren't necessarily used to, or that they didn't get enough of. And I think that was sort of one of the things I really liked about being part of a publisher that put out books, like all of your books. And I guess we are almost out of time. And so before we go, I just wanted to give each of you, we'll go back through in the order of introduction. And I just want each of you to talk about what you're working on now. So if we could start with Jon.
Yeah, thanks. I'm actually working, I have a book coming out in December. It's called The Broken Spire, and it's a fantasy novel. And so I'm pretty excited about that one. Also in December, I am one of the Slipstreamer writers that we saw a panel on a little bit earlier, and my episode is going to be coming out in December as well. And so that was a lot of fun to write. Currently, I'm working on a sequel to The Starving. I'm in some of the final stages of that now, so hopefully that'll be over to the Engen editing room shortly, within the next little while, and you might see that out next year sometime, which would be awesome. So that's what I'm into.
Awesome. Lauralana?
So I'm working on a few things as well. I'm also part of the Slipstreamer project. So my book is coming out for that in summer of 2021. So that's something I'm currently working on. I'm also editing my first draft of book 2, The One After Ashes. So that is slated to come the end of 2021. Huzzah! And other than that, I just have my own little side project one-off I'm working on, which is seems like it's going to be a short sci-fi novel or novella.
Cool. How about you, Sarah?
You guys are busy. I'm working on the follow-up to The Love of Summer, which again is set in the same world but different characters, and see where that goes. Hopefully these guys like it and they want to put that out for me too. Outside of that, I'm also writing a full-length play, which hopefully we will get out of COVID times and I will be able to stage by this time next year. So we're fingers crossed on that one. And I also, while I have the 30 seconds, I want to say thank you, Amanda, for all the work you did to organize all of this and get it all together, and for letting me rant for a very long time for no reason about why I don't like tropes.
Same.
You guys are great. And this is my first time moderating, so I really appreciate all of your patience. With,
You did really good.
Aw,
great job.
you're too sweet. Okay, well, we're done, and thank you so much for answering all of these questions, and I'm looking forward to talking to you guys in person again soon. Hopefully,
Yay.
fingers crossed.
Yay.
Bye.
Bye.